Hello, everyone, and welcome again to today's webinar covering the release of Portfolio Manager Web Services version 24.0. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us. My name is Dan Dreyer, and I'm a recent addition to the EPA. I'm a part of the Energy Star Commercial and Industrial Branch, and I'm the new technical lead for the Energy Star Web Services. I'm excited to join you today to share important information about our next release. My role is to introduce the presentation and walk you through our agenda, after which I will hand it over to Josh Williams of our support contractor, GDIT, and my colleague Leslie Cook of the Energy Star Buildings Program. Let's take a look at our agenda. First, included in the beta release, we would like to introduce our new scoring model for fire station properties in Canada. Then we will discuss our newly launched Portfolio Manager test user interface to accompany the test API environment. Then we will discuss our new optional schema elements to support renewable natural gas tracking. For our live environment only release in February, we will introduce our new source EUI appears high or low metric. We will then look towards the future and discuss upcoming enhancements for 2025, specifically the Portfolio Manager upgrade project and the next-gen certification release. Finally, we'll touch on customer support and address questions and discuss at the end of the presentation. Thank you again for joining us. I'm now going to hand it off to Joshua.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. So welcome, everyone. As Dan already introduced, my name is Joshua Williams. I'm with GDIT as a software developer, and I'll be covering the enhancements for 24.0. So first off, I'll start with just our release schedule for the 24.0 beta and live. We released beta on December 8th, and it was available on Monday morning. The 24.0 live release is scheduled for February 23rd and will be available on February 24th. So an important note is that from now until February 23rd, the live and test environments are different. One is running 24.0 code, and live is 23.4. Okay, so that is our schedule. I'll jump right into the content. So for release 24.0 beta and live, we have one model update, which is the Canadian Fire Station score update, followed by the release of the Portfolio Manager test user interface, a new renewable natural gas tracking enhancement, and a live release only item, which is the source EUI appears higher or low metric. So this is just a quick summary. So the Canadian Fire Station was not a scoreable type, and now we are launching the 1 to 100 Energy Star score for the fire station. We'll jump into the updates. U.S. fire station properties will remain ineligible to receive a 1 to 100 score, while Canadian properties that contain a fire station property use type may now receive a score if it's a mixed property use type. All right, so for fire station model, there are 6 new use details and 8 new use detail metrics. So to go through each, the first new use detail is the number of full-time equivalent workers, followed by the weekly building occupied hours, then the number of emergency vehicles, the number of annual emergency incidents, and a % heated and a % cooled use detail. Each of those new use details have an associated metric, as you can see on the right-hand side. The number of full-time equivalent workers, along with the number of emergency vehicles, additionally have a density-based metric. Okay. On to the use details themselves. So this table here shows the use detail name, followed by the use detail element name that you will use in your payloads, and some additional information. So I'll go through each. So the number of worker on maid shift has a default value and is density based, which is 0.969 per 1,000 square feet. The number of full-time equivalent workers also has a default value that is density based at 1.163 per 1,000 square feet. The weekly building occupied hours has a default value that is just regular value of 168. Next, the weekly operating hours also has a default value of 60. The number of emergency vehicles is also a default value that is density based at 0.64 per 1,000 square feet. And lastly here, the number of annual emergency incidents has a default as well, with that as a value of 250. Moving on to the last couple details. The percent that can be heated also has a default value of 100. The percent that can be cooled has a default value of 100. And lastly, the number of computers does not have a default value, and therefore the default type and default value columns are not applicable. For any existing fire station properties, we have some backfill details for these new use details. All new use details, so as an example, the number of emergency vehicles will be set to an initial value of 0 versus instead of the default value. All existing use details, for example, number of workers on main shift that already exists as a use detail type for a fire station, if it does have a value, it will remain. If it does not have a value, it will be set to 0, as you can see in the example in the second bullet. If the number of workers on main shift current value is 50, it will remain 50. The new value will be 50. If the current number of workers on main shift does not have a value, it will be set to 0. Okay. So as always, we just provide a list of impacted services for the use detail changes. So the post property use, the get property use by ID, the post property use details, the get use details revisions, the put, oh, I'm gonna type it there, put use detail IDs, and the get ID hierarchy by use detail ID, and the put property design, as well as the post target finder. You will encounter the updates and new elements in these services as you use them. And you, as always, we have updated documentation can be accessed at the following URLs, and you'll have copies of these slides as well. So moving on, these are the use detail metrics names that will have been created in association with the new use details. These metrics will be available via the standard get property metrics URL. They return time-weighted value for the specified property at the annual reporting period. Alternatively, you can also call the get property use details metrics service. So here, the table shows the metric category, the GUI name, and the web services name. So the new use details fall into the property use details category. And we have the number of full-time equivalent workers and its associated name. Same for number of full-time equivalent worker density. You can see the density there is just appended to the end of the web services name. Weekly operating hours, number of emergency vehicles, and number of emergency vehicles density has the density appended at the end as well. So this table is just for your reference to call the use detail metrics via the get property metrics service. And here's the last two, the fire station percent heated and the fire station percent cooled. All right, so that covers fire station, and now we are going to jump into the portfolio manager test user interface. This has been a long-standing request from the community, and we're really excited that we're able to launch this and provide this for you. So we're going to jump right into the details. So historically, there has been no test UI corresponding to the test API environment. Beta has always been API only, and just to test web service code and volume testing, but you never had the ability to see the visual representation of the data that you're working with. And this is something that we are now providing. So the new introduction of the Test UI will provide you the interface and allow the providers to see and test the connection and sharing process from the standpoint of their customers. You can also streamline any development and integration of web services. The test UI will also make it easier for web service providers to conduct their ongoing development, enhancement, and QA activities in the test environment rather than performing these tasks in the live environment. So one important note that we want to bring attention to is that there is no data transfer available between the live and test environment. You will not be able to copy any existing data from live to test or vice versa. As you may recall, we have recently launched multi-factor authentication for all of our users this year. Multi-factor authentication will also be an option for user authentication in the test environment, and you will be able to use the same login.gov account between the live and test environment. You will just need to opt into it through your account settings for your test UI account. Let's see, next, as part of introducing the test UI interface, we are removing some APIs that were only previously available in the test environment as they relate to the sharing, connection and sharing. Previously, since there was no user interface, this was the only way that you were able to create connections and share tests between your web service account and a regular account or customers. You had to use the APIs to perform this action. So now these APIs have been removed in favor of following the current standard that is in live. So from live, you will, from the test environment interface, you will now create those sharing requests within the user interface, and then you will still be able to accept them via API. So here's the list of the APIs that we have removed in the test environment. In the table here, this is pretty much from our web service documentation page, our previous web service documentation page. In addition, we have also removed the ability to do a post account to create a user account. You will now do so via the test UI user interface and create an account there. Okay, so this slide shows what the test UI user interface will look like. So the test user environment is identified by the /PM test in the URL, a banner and updated language throughout to keep you aware of which environment you're working on. There is a link provided here to using an FAQ to just kind of give you some guidance on how to use the Portfolio Manager user interface. And also here's the link as well in its entirety. Okay, so we know there's some impacts on test API users as it relates to the introduction of the test user interface. First off, being account creation. So existing test accounts will remain accessible. We're not wiping any accounts or anything like that. So you will be able to log in via the UI and continue to authenticate via web services with your existing credentials. Any new test accounts will be or must be created via the create a new test account workflow, which is available on the login page, and it is highlighted here in red. New test customer accounts can be created via the test UI, or they can be created via an API call. This is for customer accounts only. So when creating an account that you would like to enable for web service access in the new test environment, UI environment, you will need to follow these steps to enable your API access. So all new accounts will need to activate the API access via their account settings. So after you have created an account, you can navigate to the account settings as highlighted in the screenshot below, select the software development tab, and select the yes radio button to enable your API access. Once you have done these steps, after selecting yes, you will be redirected to a page where you will specify your web service settings. So this is specifically what types of meters do you support? Do you have a terms of use that you would like to display to your to any connections that you may create? Those types of things. And once you have selected all of your preferences and submitted your form, you will receive a successful error message that says, congratulations, you now have test access to web services, and you will be able to start sending web service requests using the credentials of the account that you have just created and set your preferences on. So moving on to just some more impact of the processing of connection and sharing requests, it is no longer necessary or possible to simulate the initiation of a connection and share request via an API call. Instead, you will now initiate that connection and share request from the test customer account in the UI, and then access the process pending request using your test API user account via the connection and sharing API calls that are already existing. And the most important point we want to bring up is that this process is now identical between the two environments. So when you are working to improve your process, you will know, you have that confidence that what you're doing in the test environment will match what happens in the live environment. And we have complete documentation linked here below on how you can create connection and sharing between providers and customer accounts. All right, so that sums up the Portfolio Manager Test UI. We're really excited about it, and we'll it helps on your development needs. Moving on, we have a new enhancement that relates to renewable natural gas tracking, and I'll dive right into the details. So first off, right now, these are new optional fields that will be defined to indicate whether a natural gas meter is renewable, and then to track the percent of renewable natural gas for each consumption record on a natural gas meter. The amount of natural gas used at a property will not impact the calculation of any greenhouse gas emissions at this time. So here are some details on the two new elements that we are adding to web services to begin the tracking of renewable natural gas. These elements at the time of this release, they are simply placeholders for data entry, and any inputs will be ignored. They will become functional in a subsequent release. So the elements that are supported by the following calls: the post meter, the put meter, the post consumption data for a meter, and the put consumption data. So first off, in the table below, we will be adding a element renewable natural gas, which will be of type Boolean and a default value of false. And this will be on the meter level in the meter XSD. The second element is the percent renewable gas, which is a type decimal of 2 places with a 0 to 100 value. And there is no default. And this will be on the meter consumption level or the meter consumption XSD object. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. Okay. Here, moving to the next slide, here are 2 example screenshots of how you would use these in your web service payloads. So on the left-hand side, we have an example post meter where we are posting a natural gas meter to a property. And you can see, as indicated by the red arrow on line 8 of the left screenshot, we have the renewable natural gas element with a value of true. On the right-hand side, we have the post meter consumption example where we are posting a meter consumption entry record for a natural gas meter. And on line 6, and indicated by the red arrow, we have the percent renewable natural gas element with a value of 61.62% for that meter consumption record. Again, for now, these elements are accepted by the web services, but they will not be persisted, and that will become that behavior will come later in a subsequent release. All right, so that covers it for renewable natural gas tracking. We will now move on to the source EUI appears high or low metric. This is where, just as a reminder, this item will only be available after the 25.0 live release. It is not currently available in the beta or live environment. We are introducing a new metric that will indicate whether a property appears to use a large or small amount of energy or median amount of energy relative to its property type and size. The potential values of this metric are high, low, okay, or not available. This metric falls into the data accuracy category, and you can see the GUI name is alert-source EUI appears high, low, and the web service name alert source EUI appears high or low. This next slide just shows an example of the metric being called via the get property metrics. So as you can see here, we are calling a property get property metrics call with the measurement system of EPA and a period ending date of 12/23 and a collection of metrics. And in this scenario, we have a movie theater returning its gross floor area, its source EUI, or its source energy total, and then its source intensity. And then the last metric, as indicated by the red arrow on line 12, there's the alert source EUI appears high or low. In this particular case, it is returning an OK value, meaning the source EUI is within normal bound range for the given property use type, the expected bound range for this property use type. Okay, so that covers the enhancements for the 24.0 web services release. I will pass it to Leslie Cook to go over the upcoming enhancements for 2025. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Josh. And thanks everyone for joining us today. This was a really exciting release for us. Any new models coming out are always great. So the fire stations were great. Like Josh said, I just wanted to reiterate, we're so excited to have the new test UI up and ready for you to use. And I did want to thank you personally for the good idea that you shared with us over the years to add this. And we've always wanted to do it. And we had the resources to get that done this year. So thanks for your patience, and please do let us know how that works out for you. Okay, so we can get into a look ahead at 2025. I've got a couple of items that I wanted to highlight for you. And the first is the Energy Star Next Gen certification, which is our upcoming launch of the newest building level certification we have launched since the Energy Star certification. So this is, first I want to clarify, in addition to Energy Star certification, this will be a separate and new building certification from EPA. And our purpose here is, in general, is to recognize the most energy efficient plus low emissions buildings. So it goes a bit beyond Energy Star certification. The performance criteria, first, you must meet all the performance criteria and score to 75, just like you would if you were applying for Energy Star certification. So that's the first baseline. The second element is the use of renewable energy. To be eligible for this certification, your property must obtain at least 30% of your total energy you consume from eligible renewable sources. If you are operating a building that's 100% electrically operated, then that counts for that second criteria. Third, there is a requirement to meet a direct emissions target, and this is based on your property types. So this is your direct greenhouse gas emissions intensity from the use of your on-site fuels, like natural gas. And if you'd like to learn more, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, hopefully you're excited to work with your clients and customers to pursue this new recognition. You can read more about our rationale for launching this program and learn more about those new GHGI targets at the links on your site on the slide there. So what is new now is that part of this release that we did this past Sunday night was to add 3 new metrics that will allow users to determine their eligibility for Next Gen certification. So first is how much of your power is eligible green power. And again, those links that I provided on the previous slide will go into more details about the rules of what's eligible. Next, the metric is % of your site energy that is eligible green power. That's needed for us to calculate your eligibility. And then next is your Energy Star Next Gen target for your direct GHG emissions intensity. And again, that is based on your building type. So, schools clearly have a different heating need than something like a residential building or an office building. Those metrics are available now. And then I did want to note right away that we are planning to start accepting applications in late February with the live release. So we'll open up applications then. So now's the time to get ready. And to do so, you can see now in Portfolio Manager, there's a new line added to the badge that previously only indicated your eligibility or your application status for certification. Now you can click a new link, says check eligibility for next gen certification, and it will tell you if your building is or is not eligible in those three categories: superior energy performance, renewable resources, and meeting your GHGI target. So please do, I encourage you to, well, first update your green power information if you haven't already done so. There's going to be an email coming out, I believe later this week, with details on the launch of this program, including details about updating green power information. But now is the time between now and late February to get ready if you've got any buildings amongst your portfolio or your clients' portfolios that might be eligible. Okay, next I just wanted to give a bit of an update on the Portfolio Manager upgrade project. We do have a website where you can follow along with our progress. We are all hands on deck working very diligently on this project. We're conducting research. We are working up our requirements, and the development has begun of the new user interface, which really is a rebuild of the UI that people interact with. And we're doing usability testing, and we have decided upon updated, more modern, user-friendly design and navigation system. In addition, and what might be more interesting to you, since you all work with the web services, we're also during this period, especially focused in 2025 and beyond, looking at IT infrastructure updates that are going to improve the overall system performance and facilitate the growth that we see year on year. I did want to share that recently we did some system updates to our underlying architecture that supports Portfolio Manager and the web services. And we did see some measurable early, very positive results in terms of faster performance, API calls taking less time to be pushed and pulled. So you may have noticed that on your end. We're going to continue to quantify those improvements, and then we'll communicate that back out to you. But we did recently make that improvement as part of this project, and we were very pleased. And feel free to share your experience if you have seen a faster tool. So please do stay tuned. The focus of 2025 for this project really is going to be that user interface rebuild and any IT infrastructure updates that support that and improve performance. So I think at this point, I hand it back to Josh.
Yep, thank you, Leslie. Okay. Thank you for the updates regarding the upcoming enhancements for 2025. So as always, we have our customer support team to assist you with any issues that arise. We have release notes that provide the list of changes for each release. Our standard weekly maintenance window, just a reminder, is Monday through Thursday from 10 p.m. to 11 Eastern and Sunday 8 p.m. to midnight Eastern. We always prioritize web service questions, and we know that each of you represent, have quite a volume of portfolio on your plate. So definitely reach out to us if you have any issues that need to be addressed, and we will take care of it. So lastly, I will pass it to Andrew Schulte, who will facilitate the Q&A portion of this webinar.
Great. Well, thanks, Josh, and thanks, Leslie and Dan. for speaking today, and thanks to everybody who joined us this afternoon. So, we are half the way through our scheduled time, and we're on to the Q&A section, so we can keep answering questions until 3 p.m. Eastern, or if we get through all the questions, we can go ahead and end a little early. But I would ask that if anyone has questions that popped up during the presentation, if you could please go ahead and send them through to the host via the chat window. We'll make sure to get those queued up and answered. We have a few in queue right now, and since we just finished up talking about next gen, I did want to ask a couple questions that have come up. So the first one is whether there will be any additional resources pertaining to the next gen certification. Leslie, I think this would be a good one for you to respond to. I can go ahead and drop a link in the chat window to the main landing page for all things related to next gen. But Leslie, if you have any additional details you'd like to share regarding, guidance documents and other resources, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And we can add that main link to the slides too for any folks that need that. So thank you for putting that homepage in the chat. Before we're open for applications within Portfolio Manager, which is where you will apply when you're eligible, we will be working on and distributing technical reference documents. You can take a look at what's on the page already, both for the building owners and managers who are working to make their buildings eligible for the certification, and also for the professionals. And I know many of you on the line may be hoping to be the ones to verify the applications for your clients and customers. And so updated guidance for licensed professionals on that, on the right requirements and the application process will be available as well. I will be doing webinars. I would say the most, the first element is being eligible for Energy Star certification. So there's not a lot new there, right? But I think what we'll really focus on in our outreach is helping folks get their green power offsite, especially green power resources tracked in Portfolio Manager correctly, and understand what's eligible for this certification. Those updates need to be made in order for you to understand if you're eligible and for us to, get your application started. So there'll be a lot of technical resources around that. There's already a number of FAQs related to green power. If you search our FAQ library, and we did make a very big substantial update to green power in August to support everything we need for Energy Star Next Gen. So it's a new way of tracking some of these products, and it's based on a lot of user input, grounded in how offsite green power products are purchased and tracked and managed. We hadn't updated that in over 10 years, so that was much needed. So I'd say there'll be a lot on green power. There'll be a lot for licensed professionals, and if any of you find that there are gaps in our resources, please do let us know, and we will work quickly to get the information you need out there.
Great. Well, thanks, Leslie. And your comments raised prompted a few other questions that came in, so I can read these out. One question had to do with the eligible renewable sources for next gen certification. Is that something we want to address here, or else there may be an FAQ that we can point to?
There is an FAQ on that. Actually, I just was looking at it.
Okay.
Sorry,
I can go
minute.
grab it if you'd like, or if you happen to see it.
I think I may have closed out of it. If you don't mind grabbing it,
Yep.
Andrew, I no, we've got a pretty clear FAQ already on that one.
All right, I'm going to find that and drop it in. Yes, I will look for this. And I cannot find it immediately, and so we can either respond to this user, or Leslie, if you can find it, I can move forward with the next questions, if that works.
Yeah, I just had it, so if you want to
Okay,
move
cool.
forward, we'll find it.
That would be great. Thank you so
Yep.
much. Let's see. Okay, so there was a question about whether there's any intention to add functionality in terms of submitting buildings for compliance with benchmarking ordinances. So there are a couple approaches here. So there are currently two main methods out there in the marketplace that are being used when jurisdictions have benchmarking mandates or building performance standards. The long-standing approach is that the local or state jurisdiction would create a data request template, and then they would publish that data request template. And then they would, then the building owners required to report would click the link for the template. It would take them directly to that template in Portfolio Manager. They would select the buildings to report on, and that's how compliance would take place. Going back, I think it's probably about 2 years at this point, there were some additional APIs that we released that basically enable API users to submit data requests on behalf of their clients to local or state jurisdictions. So that is under the reporting services section of our API. And there is, in fact, sort of a quick guide on using the APIs to help your clients or customers respond to a state or local jurisdiction's data request. I will note that in the last couple of years, there's another kind of pathway that is growing in uptake amongst state and local governments, and that is rather than publishing a data request, the ask or the compliance step for the building owner is actually to complete the benchmarking for their building through the latest calendar year, and then to actually share the entire property record with the state or local jurisdiction's portfolio manager account. That is, I don't know if I have a breakdown right now on like what percentage of state or local jurisdictions are using what approach, but we do know anecdotally that a number of jurisdictions that previously relied on the data request are moving now to the sharing based approach. For jurisdictions that are using the sharing based approach, I would note that the fundamental action there is initiating the outgoing property share request. And at this point in time, the initiation of a connection and share request can only be undertaken from within the UI. Okay, so as an API user, as a web services provider, there is no outgoing call that would allow you to share a property, right? That still has to be initiated from within the user interface, which means that either you as the service provider, you could do it from your account, or the building owner, your client could do it from their account, but that still is something that has to happen through the portfolio manager user interface. Now, I would say, over time, we have heard questions here and there about, whether we would ever consider, adding APIs that would allow API users to initiate connection or share calls. For that, I think that's something where if you have a specific use case, or if you are able to articulate when and how you would make use of that service, that's certainly something that we'd, like to gather some background on. So I would encourage you, if that is something that you're interested in, to please send us a note at the help desk. You can tag it as an API, enhancement question or wish list question, and that will get it onto that will make sure that it gets onto the team's radar for consideration. Leslie or Josh, I don't know if there's anything more that you can or want to say at this point as to why that historically hasn't been part of our API. But I can just note and say that it has not been part of our API offering since this latest architecture was released in 2013. It doesn't mean it couldn't be someday, but I think we'd like to better understand the need for that particular service and what instances of client-facing services that would support. All right.
I think the only thing I might add, really, at a higher level, going back to the portfolio manager upgrade project, we do have we're very committed to finding ways to improve that experience in any way we can, regardless of the method that you are now sharing or submitting your buildings, be it a data request response or through sharing. And again, those methods are chosen by the jurisdictions, not EPA. But we're looking at ways to smooth out the sharing process. We will definitely be digging into the data request response process and look for ways that we might be able to remove any speed bumps that are catching folks up or make improvements. So I would just say, as part of the overall goal of the portfolio manager upgrade, we're looking at ways to improve those types of workflows and also look at new features to help you track your compliance rate across a group of buildings, for instance, that might be covered in one or multiple jurisdictions. So we are looking at that very seriously as part of this upgrade. And so I would say stay tuned on that.
Excellent. Thanks, Leslie. I did see a couple of additional questions come in about next gen, so let's keep on that. Let's keep on that trend. One question was whether and how the next gen certification, aligns with or doesn't, align with the tenant space recognition. Is there going to be any next gen certification at the tenant space level, the same way that there's a tenant space recognition that is kind of subordinate to the larger whole building Energy Star certification?
Yeah, that's a great question. Energy Star Next Gen certification is and will be available at the whole building level, and there are not any current plans to offer that at the tenant level.
Great. One more question along these lines is whether there are additional incentives associated with next gen certification. I think I can start that off by saying that Energy Star as a program does not provide incentives, financial incentives for certain efforts undertaken or progress achieved. That doesn't mean that other organizations outside of Energy Star wouldn't offer incentives. So conceivably, it would certainly be possible if a utility chose, if they wanted to develop an incentive offering for customer buildings that had achieved next gen certification. But again, that is something that would need to be determined by other stakeholders in the marketplace. Leslie, do you or anybody else from EPA on the call, has there been any conversation about that? Are there any third parties expressing interest in developing incentive offerings around next gen?
I don't have any solid answer, yes or no, or any specifics to share, but I can share that there are an enormous amount of third parties that were very interested. We had an open comment period when we were proposing our program structure and criteria for next gen, and we got hundreds of comments back and a lot of supportive comments from those third parties that could be interested in that type of incentive. I can say that the market, both in the US and in Canadian markets, we've seen incentives grow around Energy Star certification. And I am almost certain that the similar thing will happen around next gen. And EPA certainly supports that. And we work with those organizations to go, work through the details of how that's offered and how they can leverage it. So I would say most likely, but we'll see what comes out, and we'll be sure to share those incentives that may be offered in the future, so that the word gets out.
Super. All right. Well, thank you for that. Going back up through our question list, I know there were a few that we passed on before while we were looking up some links to drop into the chat. So I just wanted to note that the question about eligible renewable sources for next gen certification, that was dropped into the chat window. There's a specific FAQ. If you can't find it for some reason, the title of the FAQ is "What are the eligible sources of green power?" So you could search on that from our FAQ page. But again, that link is in the chat. There was also a question that came in about, what happens if your building is already Energy Star certified? How does that impact your ability to apply for next gen certification? I do want to note that is explicitly covered on the main resource page for Energy Star Next Gen, which we had dropped into the chat window earlier. So the official language is there, but moving forward, generally speaking, as the program gets launched and as it sort of reaches maturity, the idea is that a building would only be able to apply for one of those certifications in a given year. So, in a given calendar year, you would apply for Energy Star certification or Next Gen, because Next Gen implicitly includes Energy Star certification. There are a few details to this. So basically, from the rollout of Next Gen through the end of calendar year 2025, it will be possible for a building with a current Energy Star certification for calendar year 2025, there will be an opportunity to kind of upgrade your certification to Next Gen, even if it's still the same calendar year. But starting with January 2026, basically the plan is going to be that a building will earn one of those certifications in any given year. And similar to the current Energy Star certification, once you get that certification, you will need to wait another 11 months until you are eligible to reapply. And again, at that point of reapplication, let's say you got Energy Star certification in 2025, but you weren't quite at the level of Next Gen. Well, when your certification eligibility comes up again in 2026, if by then you were meeting the Next Gen criteria, then your next certification that you could apply for, you would be able to apply for Next Gen and not just the Energy Star certification. But again, the official language is posted on the website, and unless Leslie, you'd like to say more about this.
No, that totally covers it. It's just there's a lot of details. So what I did just now is copy into the chat. Sorry, I'm a little old school, but there are the dates and the details. But again, I encourage you to go back to that main page that's in the chat, and that we will include in the slide. You can bookmark it.
Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question that came in about the portfolio manager upgrade project. Specifically, it's I believe the person who asked this may have been or has been paying close attention to the prior communications about our upgrades, and wanted to see if there are still plans to include refrigerant tracking in Portfolio Manager as part of the major upgrade or enhancement that's going on. Leslie, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. And that absolutely is still part of our plan, as there are a number of other enhancements I didn't mention today specifically. But we are wrapping up technical requirements and for refrigerant tracking in Portfolio Manager, which will be optional. And then, we will be working that into the new Portfolio Manager rebuilt interface and system. I can tell you we are very focused, almost laser focused on rebuilding the Portfolio Manager user interface and making improvements to our underlying supporting softwares. These larger enhancements like refrigerants will likely come in 2026 after the launch of the UI, unless things move along faster. I just wanted to set some expectations, but it is still that's one of our bigger priorities is refrigerants, and because it's almost ready to go from the sort of understanding the requirements, it'll probably be first out of the gate when the new UI is launched.
Super. Thanks for that. All right. Coming back up right now, I think we've made it through most questions. There are two more that I want to read out. And certainly if anybody wants to add further questions, please do. One question had to do with the going back to the renewable natural gas functionality that was spoken about earlier as part of the 24.0 upgrade. Just want to confirm, when you say that these new elements are optional, that means that if an existing API user does not make any changes to their existing integration, that's not going to break anything, correct? So if they're not passing any details about renewable natural gas at the meter or meter consumption level, that's not going to impact their ability to place those calls, will it?
That's correct, Andrew. The new elements have been defined as optional within the schema, so if they are omitted, the requests will still process without issue.
Thanks. Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that we could underline that for everybody, because obviously the meter and meter consumption level calls are, in very common use amongst almost
fundamental
all users. Yeah. So, and I know, a big part of this call is articulating, what are the changes that are and are not going to impact existing users. So we would not consider the renewable natural gas elements that are being added to the schema as optional elements. We would not consider that a schema breaking enhancement. So if you have no intention to use those elements and you just ignore them or omit them from your call, it will not impact your existing solution. All right. So the final question, just wanted to go back a little bit to the release of the test UI, which is probably the single biggest piece of the 24.0 beta release, and wanted to sort of bottom line a little bit more, how we think that the availability of this test UI will make things easier for API users. So we see at least, three main areas, and possibly more, and we'd be interested in your feedback. But the first one is that, as Josh noted earlier, the new test UI is basically going to be an exact replica of all workflows that happen in the live environment. That was sort of a key sticking point that was missing from the test API environment historically, right? Because there was no UI. There were certain steps that needed to be simulated via test-only calls. So there was a way to do the testing, but it didn't align with how your workflow would actually happen in production. So especially with regard to the customer or client initiation of connection and sharing requests, that's a really big element of the test UI. Now, just like in the live environment, all connection and share requests will be initiated from within the Portfolio Manager UI. And that just means that when you are doing end-to-end testing, or customer acceptance testing, or whatever else you're doing that requires you to mimic the real world process flow, you will be able to do that in the test UI and the test API together. Whereas prior to December 9th, you needed to do that through some workaround, simulated calls. One other thing that's going to be easier is also the creation of sample customer properties. So prior to the 24.0 beta release, if you wanted to create test properties in the test environment, you had to create it via an API call, the post property call and all the other related calls. Now, that's not really a problem for API users who anticipate making a full integration of our API. Who plan to be using the post property calls in production. But we recognize that this is kind of an unnecessary step for that category of API users who are not going to be creating properties in Portfolio Manager, right? It requires them to go through this to master this whole series of calls that they're never going to use in production. So hopefully the ability to create customer properties in the test UI, by using spreadsheet uploads and whatnot. If you need to create a simulated customer or customer portfolio, this just provides another option for how to do that, that we hope will be useful. And then finally, this may be a little bit more of an EPA priority than a API user priority, but the lack of a test UI meant that there was a fair bit of testing activity that still needed to take place in the live environment, right? So because you couldn't complete your end-to-end testing in the test environment, you would develop your solution, then request live access, but then you'd still be finishing up your testing in the live environment. And just from the perspective of having a clean break between live and production, this is helpful because presumably our API users will now be able to do more testing activity exclusively in the test environment, which moving forward will be our preference. There always is the ability to create a property in the live environment and mark it as a test property, which many of you are doing, and we appreciate that. But moving forward, the ideal approach will be that test activities happen in test and production activities happen in live. But if you do have any more thoughts or questions as to how the release of the test UI will impact your processes, please don't hesitate to ask. So at this point, we are about 1 minute from the end of our session, and we have made it through all the questions that have been asked. So if there are any last-minute questions that somebody wants to get out there, please drop them into the chat window. I will ask EPA and GDIT teams, are there any additional items that have come up through the Q&A that you would want to speak to? Or is this a good place to wrap?
Yeah, I am not seeing anything here, Andrew, so thank you. I think we can wrap here.
Excellent. Well, big thanks to everybody for taking an hour out of your day. Hopefully this gave you the information you needed about the beta release, which is currently available via the test API. As well as the plans for the live release in February. But if you have any additional questions, please go to our help desk and feel free to send us a ticket, and we will get back to you very quickly. And otherwise, I think we will wish you a good rest of your day and week. Happy holiday season, happy New Year, and we look forward to seeing you on further webinars.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone on the line. We appreciate your time today and your partnerships. And Happy New Year.